What if I told you your next batch of gummies would take less time than taking a trip to your local dispensary? I'm your host, Margaret, a certified gangier and TCI cannabis educator, and I believe your kitchen is the best dispensary that you'll ever have. Welcome to Bite Me, the show about edibles. Welcome back, my friends. If this is your first time tuning in, I'm so glad that you're here, and we're going to be talking about gummies today, as you just heard. One of my favorite edibles to make, and one that I haven't really been making too often as of late until now. And of course, if you've been listening for a while, I appreciate your support. Thank you for being here. It really means so much to have you under the Bite Me umbrella. This gummy recipe comes at a time where like I said, I have not been making very many gummies lately. There was a place out west that I was sometimes picking up gummies from. It was sort of a legacy market spot where I could get gummies that were stronger than the ones that are typically available in legal dispensaries here in Canada because my tolerance was higher than that, although that's been actually greatly reset by doing the tolerance break that I did in January, which still seems to be at a pretty reasonable level. And I'm going to do what I can to keep it there as much as possible because it's certainly better to be a cheap date in this economy. Am I right? I was going through a drawer recently and I found a recipe card. I for whatever reason, recently I decided to sort of clean out some drawers that were in my office, and maybe I was procrastinating, not really sure what I was up to. You know how you sometimes take on projects that you would otherwise not even consider when you have something more important you should probably be doing? Well, that was me. And I was cleaning out some drawers in this little cabinet, and I found a recipe card. It was this LÄVO recipe card. I'm not sure where I got it. Maybe it came with the device when I got my LÄVO 2 a little while ago, a few years ago. And I looked at the card, and on the back was LÄVO chocolate drops, which I have actually covered on this show before. I'll have to link to that in the show notes. I did that one quite a while ago now, at least a couple of years, I think. And on the reverse side of the card was this LÄVO gummy recipe. Now, I've made plenty of gummies in the past for myself and for the show. I've covered gummies many times on the show before. There's probably maybe 4 gummy recipes that I've done on Bite Me, the show about edibles. I can link to those in the show notes as well, but they did run the gamut of, edibles that turned out more like Jell-O versus really good edibles, really good gummies. So, when I first saw this card, I didn't really think much of it, but it just so also happens that I'm working on a project right now that is being painfully slow. It's a multi-day learn to make edibles crash course that I'm working on for people who are new to making edibles, because I do know that sometimes you probably remember this yourself, that when you first started making edibles, it was kind of intimidating and you had a lot of questions, but really once you get into that groove and you kind of learn the basic steps, it's not that bad. And then you're making edibles that will rival almost anything you can buy at a dispensary. Now, before anybody comes at me, I still enjoy my dispensary edibles. I like trying out some of the drinks, new edibles that come out. I love edibles, and I still like to occasionally see what's new and what's trending in the dispensaries and in the marketplace. But it's nice to, when you make your own edibles, to not have to rely on that. So I found this card, and when I read through it, I thought, I have all the stuff to make these gummies. It seems pretty simple. And it used an infused oil to make it. And it just so happened with this crash course that I was doing on making edibles, I wanted to make a gummy recipe that was oil friendly, because a lot of people who are also starting out with making edibles typically infuse some kind of oil or butter when they're first starting out with their infusions. Yes, you can use other things to make gummies that works very well, but a lot of the times that's where people start. And I have made plenty of gummies where you used an oil and then they didn't properly set because the oil ends up being a layer on the bottom of the mold. It's just not nice. Texture-wise, looks-wise, efficiency-wise, it's not great when they don't homogenize properly. So I wanted to try this recipe out. So I tried it the first time and I was like, wow, these are really great. They turned out fantastic. They had a great texture. And they were pretty quick to put together, because one of the things I find sometimes is a lot of gummy recipes can be pretty tedious. And this one was very simple. I have since made it, I think, 3 or 4 times at this point. And I just keep them in my fridge for the most part. I will take them with me when I go out, but I have a huge jar of them. If I was to go buy that huge jar of edibles from the dispensary, it would literally cost me like the number that I have in that jar. Now, they are fairly low dose, but regardless, if I was to buy something like that in the dispensary, it probably cost me a couple $100, maybe more. That's one reason why it's great to do gummies. So why gummies? Why now? Well, I mean, like I was just saying, the cost, there's the control as well, and the consistency. So those are 3 of the reasons why I like making my own. A lot of these homemade gummy recipes are needlessly complicated, but this one was nice and simple. Sometimes I have more energy to make more complicated edibles, and a lot of the times I don't. I just want to make sure I have a supply that I can reach for whenever I need them. And I'm sure you're probably very similar. You're working hard, you're out there living your life, and you don't necessarily want to be spending a ton of time over the stove trying to make something that's going to be less than impressive. What do you need in this particular recipe? It's 5 ingredients. You need water, your infused coconut oil, a little bit of lecithin, a sprinkle of unflavored gelatin, and even more flavored gelatin. The flavored gelatin, of course, you probably recognize more as Jell-O. So you need 2 packs of Jell-O for this one recipe. Now, I used molds that when I made this recipe, almost every time, I have gotten anywhere from like 75 to 85 gummies based on the molds that I was using. So it makes quite a few. I think that's why this recipe is so quick, is because you're using the Jell-O to do a lot of the work. And then, of course, you buy packets of unflavored gelatin. But fun fact, I actually had a canister of unflavored gelatin in my cupboard. It's been there for a long time. I must have bought it. I forget why I would have bought it in the first place, except maybe it was to make gummies. But if you have one of those, then you don't need to buy the packets, and you have enough gelatin to make a whole bunch of gummies moving into the future. But if you don't necessarily want to commit to a big canister of unflavored gelatin, just buy the packets that you would find in the grocery store around the same area where you would get the Jell-O. And one of the things that does make this recipe really quick is that you're not spending time blooming the gelatins together before you make it, which interestingly doesn't seem to affect the end product at all. Now, I will note, and I got this from members in my cannabis club, is that when you're using an oil, what they suggested, they found worked very well. And having made this recipe now numerous times, and I will be making it again, I can guarantee you, is that you mix your infused oil with your lecithin ahead of time. That is one thing that I will note that I think if you do that will guarantee that you don't end up with the layer of oil. And that has been such an amazing tip. I would highly recommend that you do that. Shout out to the members of the Bite Me Cannabis Club for suggesting that at one of our high table meetings. It's something that they worked well for them. So how do you put them together? First of all, I would highly recommend you get out things like your molds and your measuring cup or squeezy bottle or droppers before you get started, because you don't want to have to be digging that out before you get started. I've made that mistake many times before. I will also note I recently bought a squeezy bottle, like the kind, when you go to a diner and they have the ketchup and the squeezy bottle on the table, something like that, because I find that so much easier for putting your liquid into the molds than trying to use those stupid droppers. Because I find I never can move fast enough before the gummy mixture starts to almost starts to set a little bit, and you have to work so quickly. And the squeezy bottle made it so much easier. Before that, I was kind of using a measuring cup because it would have a spout and it was easier, but I just found that there was a bit of waste. It still wasn't as precise. And the squeezy bottle was perfect for you'd squeeze a little bit into each mold, move on to the next one. It was very quick, and I would highly recommend that. I picked up a pack of squeezy bottles in the barbecue aisle at my local Canadian Tire for maybe $4 or something. You get them restaurant supply. I'm sure you can find them on Amazon or whatever your local store is that might have kitchenwares. It does make putting these things in a mold so much easier. 10/10 recommend. You start by combining your Jell-O with your unflavored gelatin. You mix it up. I just use like a fork and set it by the stove. And so, of course, because you're using Jell-O, you don't have to worry about flavoring or coloring or anything like that with the Jell-O. Now, you do need 2 packs. And if you see that Jell-O is on sale at your local grocery store, it's a great time to stock up. So then you take a small saucepan and you bring the water, the infused coconut oil, and the lecithin on medium heat, and you whisk them together until they're fully combined. Now remember, I've already whisked together the coconut oil and the lecithin first, and then added it to the water. Then once this mixture starts to bubble, you increase the heat to medium-high until you get a rolling boil, and you slowly add in your gelatin mixture while you're still whisking at the same time. And then you whisk it together on medium-high heat for about a minute until fully combined and smooth. And one of the things I really like about this recipe as well is that you're not necessarily having to get out the candy thermometers either, because a lot of these types of confectionery candies, gummies, often require you to get out the candy thermometer and get things to a certain temperature and all that kind of thing. And this worked without having to do that. So it's another reason why I liked this quick and easy gummy recipe. And then you turn the heat source down to low while you're still whisking. The mixture should be bubbling, but not boiling. And then that's when you do that for another minute or 2. And then you pour it into your squeezy bottle, or you use your measuring cup or droppers. You use that to fill your molds that you have at hand. Now, I will also remind you that you're going to need an oven mitt. I have this like oven glove, and I wish I had more than one actually, because that squeezy bottle, just being pretty basic plastic, is going to get very hot with your hot gummy mixture in it. So you will need something. I wish I had 2 of these oven gloves, because they just give you a little more dexterity than an oven mitt would. So just bear that in mind if you're going to go the squeezy bottle route. But again, until then, you can always use something with a spout to get them into the molds. Fill the molds, and then you place them in the fridge until they set, which I find just happens relatively quickly. Like we're talking like half an hour, less than an hour. I haven't really timed it that closely because I kind of put them in there and then I check on them later, but it doesn't take that long. You pop them out and you enjoy. And then the one little thing that I also do is I usually put them in a bowl all together after I've popped them out of the molds, with a small bit of cornstarch, just to make sure that they don't really stick together. That was actually another tip that I got from somebody in the Bite Me Cannabis Club. And that's basically it. That's how simple they are to put together. Now, I have been wanting to experiment with maybe adding some extra flavoring, or maybe, if you have lemon and you want to do a lemon raspberry or something like that. So I'm going to be experimenting with it again, because again, these are so quick to come together that I love them so much. This is almost I don't want to say idiot proof recipe, but it's a recipe that it's pretty hard to mess up. So, of course, you do want to make sure that you figure out the potency of your edibles when you're making them. This recipe calls for, if you do the full batch, and I think when I first made it, I took the batch and I cut it in half just because I wanted to see how it would turn out. Now, the recipe calls for infused coconut oil. I've done it every single time with infused olive oil because that's what I had on hand, and I was using up my infused olive oil. But I just wanted to see how they turned out before I made a full batch. But you definitely want to make sure you know how strong the oil is that you're using for this recipe. And then you can figure out, how potent they are per dose. The ones that I've made more recently, because it was an olive oil I already had on hand, with 84 gummies, they were turning out to be about 2.5 milligrams, which again is pretty low, but it does mean that I can eat more of them, because sometimes I'm probably going to be trying a batch that will be stronger. You can play around with this recipe. You're going to be experimenting with it, but just remember that when you eat that one edible, it could take upwards of 45 minutes to an hour to kick in, depending on what's already in your stomach. And I did a whole episode on the science of onset time. So start low and go slow as always. But if you're pretty comfortable with where you're at and your tolerance, then this will be preaching to the choir. This was a great recipe. I was so happy with this find. I got to say thanks, LÄVO, for putting this one out there. Excellent recipe. All the credit to them. My only thing I would change is that you pre-mix the oil in your lecithin and get a squeezy bottle for ease, because that is probably the most tedious part about making gummies like this, is just getting them into the molds and getting them into quickly without wasting too much. So with that, my friends, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I would love to see your gummy recipe and how it turned out for you if you try it out. There's so many cool molds out there as well. It can be really fun to play around with that too. I do have a lot of fun episodes that I'm planning for the coming months, but if you have any suggestions or something you want to hear about, let me know. This show is for me, but it's also for you, and I want to be mindful of what it is that you're looking for. Is there a recipe you'd like me to cover? Is there a topic you'd like me to cover, or a guest that you would like to see on the show? Let me know. I can be incredibly persuasive when it comes to having some guests on my show. Maybe not always. I try. So with that, my friends, I am your host, Margaret, and until next time, stay curious and stay high.